I never thought a single joke could destroy 15 years of marriage. But that's exactly what happened on that warm June evening in our backyard. My name is Ethan Miller. For most of my adult life, I've been known as Rachel's husband, the quiet engineer who grilled perfect steaks and paid the bills on time. I was content with my life, or at least I thought I was, until that summer barbecue changed everything. Our home in suburban Seattle was the gathering place for neighbors and friends. That night was no different. Good food, flowing drinks, and casual conversation under string lights. I was at the grill, carefully turning ribeyes to the rhythm of laughter and clinking glasses. Rachel had always been the social butterfly between us. While I focused on temperature control and timing, she fluttered between guests with her signature charm and just enough wine in her system to amplify her naturally outgoing personality. "Who wants to swap husbands?" she called out suddenly, her voice carrying across our backyard. The chatter immediately quieted. "Mine has zero ambition, but at least he's low maintenance." The silence that followed felt eternal. I looked up from the grill to see every eye in the yard darting between Rachel and me. Some neighbors laughed uncomfortably. Others stared at their drinks. "Nice joke," I said evenly, my hands continuing their work. Not really dinner conversation, though. No one laughed a second time. The moment hung in the air until Grace Parker, our recently divorced neighbor from across the fence, broke the tension. "I'd take him," she said with a smile that seemed genuinely warm rather than mocking. "Sounds like a man who values peace." People laughed again, but differently, with relief rather than amusement. I noticed Rachel's smile tighten at the edges. Her eyes narrowed slightly at Grace, who simply sipped her drink, maintaining easy eye contact with me. "Looks like my advertisement got a response," I said quietly, placing the tongs on the side table. Then I walked into the house, leaving 20 guests and my wife to make sense of what had just happened. Inside, I stood at the kitchen sink, hands gripping the counter. My heart hammered against my ribs. In 15 years of marriage, Rachel had made countless jokes at my expense. Usually I laughed along. It was easier that way. But something about this one, the public nature of it, the casual cruelty, the way she'd reduced me to a punchline, it cut deeper than she knew. I could hear the party continuing outside, though the laughter seemed more subdued. Part of me wanted to go back out, plaster on a smile, and pretend nothing had happened. It would be easier. But sometimes the easy path just leads you further from where you need to be. When the last guest left around midnight, Rachel stormed into the kitchen where I was loading the dishwasher. "You completely embarrassed me," she hissed, slamming her wine glass onto the counter. "You just stood there while they all got uncomfortable." "Embarrassed you?" I kept my voice low and controlled, though anger simmered beneath the surface. "You're the one who humiliated me in front of everyone we know." "It was a joke, Ethan. God, when did you become so sensitive?" I closed the dishwasher slowly and turned to face her. "Was it funny?" "What?" "Was it funny when you announced to our friends and neighbors that your husband is an unambitious disappointment? Did you get the laugh you were hoping for?" Rachel's face flushed. "You're overreacting. Everyone knows I was kidding." "Do they? Because I'm not sure I do anymore." I walked past her toward our bedroom. At the doorway, I paused and looked back. "Respect isn't something you can joke away, Rachel. And once it's gone, you can't joke it back into existence." I slept in the guest room that night, or tried to. Mostly I stared at the ceiling, replaying the evening in my mind, and wondering how we'd reached this point. When had Rachel's perception of me changed? Or had it always been this way, and I'd just been too content to notice? By morning, I'd made a decision. I left the house before dawn, drove to a coffee shop across town, and sat there for hours, planning my next steps. Around noon, I sent Rachel a text. "Taking some time to think. We'll be back tonight." She didn't respond. I spent the day driving around Seattle, visiting places that had once meant something to us. The viewpoint where I'd proposed, the restaurant where we'd celebrated my promotion 5 years ago, the park where we'd once talked about having children before Rachel decided her career couldn't accommodate a family. By evening, I'd found clarity. This wasn't about one joke. It was about years of small cuts that had finally drawn blood. When I returned home, Rachel was waiting in the living room, arms crossed. She'd been crying. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "I called you 12 times. "I needed space to think," I said, setting my keys on the entry table. I left you a message. A vague text is not a message, Ethan. I've been worried sick. Have you? Or were you worried about what the neighbors would think if they knew I'd walked out? Her eyes widened. That's cruel. Is it? Or is it just honest? I sat down across from her. We need to talk about what happened last night. It was a stupid joke, she said, her voice softening. I've apologized. What more do you want? Have you apologized? Because I don't recall hearing the words. Rachel blinked. I'm sorry. Of course I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I nodded slowly. I believe you didn't intend to hurt me, but you did. And I think you did it because somewhere along the line, you stopped seeing me as your equal, as someone worthy of your respect. That's not true, tears welled in her eyes. I respect you, Ethan. I love you. Do you? Because people who respect each other don't make them the butt of jokes. They don't belittle their choices or dreams. Rachel wiped at her eyes. This is insane. We're fighting over a stupid comment at a barbecue. No, we're finally addressing something that's been wrong for a long time. I leaned forward. When was the last time you asked me about my day and actually listened to the answer? When did you last show interest in my work, my hobbies, my thoughts on anything important? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I could see her searching for examples and coming up empty. I think we should separate, I said quietly. I need time to figure out if there's anything left to save here. Rachel's face crumpled. You can't be serious. 15 years of marriage, and you want to throw it away over one bad joke? It's not about the joke, Rachel. It's about what the joke revealed. I spent that night in a hotel downtown. The next morning, I called into work, requesting a week of personal leave. My boss, sensing the gravity in my voice, approved it without question. Around noon, there was a knock at my hotel room door. I expected Rachel, but when I opened it, Grace Parker stood in the hallway. Your wife is looking for you, she said without preamble. She came by my house this morning, asking if I'd seen you. I frowned. How did you find me? A small smile. I didn't. I tried 3 hotels near your office before getting lucky. May I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. Grace walked past me into the room, glancing around at the generic hotel decor and my open suitcase. Nice place, she said dryly. It's temporary. She turned to face me. Rachel is telling everyone you're having a midlife crisis. Of course she is, I sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. It's easier than admitting she might be wrong. Grace leaned against the desk. For what it's worth, most people don't believe her. What she said at the barbecue, it wasn't right. Why are you here, Grace? She crossed her arms. Good question. I guess I wanted to make sure you're okay. And to tell you that whatever you decide, you shouldn't feel guilty about putting yourself first for once. Speaking from experience? My ex-husband was a lot like Rachel, actually. Charismatic. Funny. The life of every party. She looked out the window. He made jokes at my expense too. Small ones at first, then bigger ones. By the end, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be treated with basic dignity. I nodded slowly. How long have you been divorced? 2 years. Best decision I ever made, even though it nearly broke me at the time. She pushed away from the desk. Anyway, I should go. I just wanted to check on you. Thank you, I said, walking her to the door. It means a lot. Grace paused in the doorway. For what it's worth, Ethan, any woman would be lucky to have a husband like you. Steady, reliable men aren't boring. They're the foundation everything else is built on. After she left, I sat for a long time thinking about her words, about foundations and respect, and what it meant to truly see another person. That evening, Rachel called. I let it go to voicemail. Then she texted, "Please come home, we can work this out." I didn't respond. The next day I visited a lawyer to understand my options. I didn't want to rush into divorce, but I needed to protect myself if that's where we were headed. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Marianne, laid out the process in clear terms. Washington is a no-fault state, she explained. The process is straightforward, especially since you don't have children. The main challenge will be dividing assets. I nodded, making notes. I'm not looking to take everything. I just want what's fair. That's refreshing to hear, Marianne said with a small smile. But remember, fair is subjective. Your wife may have a different definition. On my way out of the lawyer's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Standing up for yourself isn't easy, but it gets easier. Hang in there. I stared at the message, an unexpected warmth spreading through my chest. There was something deeply affirming about being seen, truly seen, by another person. When I returned to my hotel room, I found Rachel sitting in the lobby, waiting for me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Enough of this, Ethan," she said, rising to meet me. "You've made your point. Come home." "It's not about making a point," I replied, guiding her to a quiet corner of the lobby. "This isn't a negotiation tactic." "Then what is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're throwing away our marriage over nothing." I shook my head. "If you still think this is about nothing, then you haven't been listening." "Fine," she crossed her arms. "I made a thoughtless joke. I'm sorry. It was wrong. What more do you want from me?" "I want you to understand why it hurt," I said quietly. "I want you to recognize that this isn't about one comment, but about a pattern of disrespect that's existed for years." Rachel's expression hardened. "So I'm the villain in this story? I'm the bad guy because I teased you at a party?" "This isn't about villains, Rachel. It's about two people who've grown apart without realizing it." She studied my face. "There's someone else, isn't there?" "What? No, of course not." "Don't lie to me," she hissed. "It's that neighbor, isn't it? Grace? I saw how she looked at you. There's nothing between me and Grace. Then why did Karen Miller see you two talking outside your hotel yesterday?" I blinked. Karen saw... Wait, are people spying on me now? "She was driving by and recognized you," Rachel said defensively. "That's not the point. The point is you're sneaking around with the divorced neighbor while pretending this is about some joke." "I'm not sneaking anywhere," I said, frustration mounting. "Grace came to check on me because she's been through something similar. That's it." "I don't believe you." Rachel stood up. "If you want to throw away 15 years for some divorcee who batted her eyelashes at you, then fine. But don't pretend this is about respect." She stormed out of the lobby, leaving me stunned. How had we reached a point where we could no longer even hear each other? That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my brother Michael in Portland. We drifted apart after he told me he thought I was disappearing into my marriage with Rachel. At the time, I dismissed his concerns as jealousy or misunderstanding. Now I wasn't so sure. "Ethan." His voice was surprised when he answered. "Everything okay?" "Not really," I admitted. "Rachel and I are separating." There was a pause. "I'm sorry to hear that. What happened?" I explained the situation, the barbecue, the joke, the aftermath. As I spoke, I realized how small it might sound to someone outside the situation, how petty, but Michael didn't laugh or dismiss it. Instead, he sighed heavily. "Honestly, I've been waiting for this call for years." "What do you mean?" "Ethan, the last time you visited, Rachel spent the entire weekend making little digs at you. Your clothes, your job, your opinions. Nothing was off limits. Mom and Dad noticed it too." I felt a chill. Why didn't anyone say anything? We tried in our way, but you always defended her. After a while, it seemed easier to just change the subject. We talked for over an hour, about Rachel, about our parents, about the years we'd lost to distance and misunderstanding. By the time we hung up, I'd promised to visit Portland soon, regardless of what happened with my marriage. The next morning, I woke to my phone buzzing with notifications. Overnight, Rachel had posted a long, emotional status update about our separation. Without naming me directly, she described a husband having a midlife crisis, possibly involving another woman. The post had dozens of sympathetic comments. I scrolled through them, recognizing names of mutual friends and colleagues, people taking sides in a story they didn't fully understand. My phone rang. It was my boss, Alan. "Ethan," he said when I answered, "I don't normally involve myself in employees' personal lives, but I've received some concerning messages from your wife." My stomach dropped. "What kind of messages?" "Emails suggesting you might be experiencing some kind of breakdown. She's worried about your access to sensitive company information during this difficult time." I closed my eyes, anger washing through me. She's trying to get me suspended. "No one's talking about suspension," Alan said carefully, "but given the circumstances, Perhaps extending your leave would be wise. After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Rachel had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. She was trying to damage my career, my reputation, my relationships, all because I'd finally stood up for myself. I called Marianne, the lawyer. "I need to accelerate things," I said when she answered. "My wife is escalating the situation." "I understand," Marianne replied, her voice calm and professional. "Let's meet this afternoon. In the meantime, document everything. Screenshots, texts, emails, anything that shows her behavior." As I gathered evidence, I received another text from Grace. "Just heard what Rachel's saying online. Don't respond. That's what she wants." I stared at the message. Grace was right. Engaging with Rachel's public campaign would only feed the drama, but staying silent felt like conceding defeat. I called Grace instead of texting back. She answered on the second ring. "Are you okay?" she asked immediately. "Not really," I admitted. "She's trying to get me suspended from work." Grace's sharp intake of breath was audible. That's beyond petty. That's vindictive." "I didn't think she could be this way," I said, the truth of it hitting me anew. "I knew we had problems, but people show their true colors when they don't get their way," Grace said quietly. "Trust me, I learned that the hard way." "I feel like I'm losing control of the narrative," I confessed. "People are believing her version of events." "Then change the narrative," Grace suggested, "not by fighting back online, but by living your truth quietly and with dignity. The people who matter will see it." After our call, I drove to the office to meet with Alan in person. I explained the situation as calmly and professionally as I could, showing him the documentation of Rachel's escalating behavior. "I'm not having a breakdown," I concluded. "I'm finally setting boundaries in a relationship that's become unhealthy. If you need to place me on leave, I understand. But I want you to know the truth." Alan studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Take the rest of the week, Ethan. But I expect you back on Monday. Whatever's happening at home, I know your work will remain excellent." Relief washed through me. At least professionally, I was on solid ground. When I left the office, I found Rachel waiting by my car in the parking garage. Her arms were crossed, her expression thunderous. "You went behind my back," she said as I approached. "You talked to Alan." "You tried to get me suspended," I countered. "What did you expect me to do?" "I was trying to help you. You're clearly not thinking clearly right now." I unlocked my car. "Rachel, go home. We'll talk through lawyers from now on." "Lawyers?" Her voice rose. "You can't be serious." "You involved my employer in our personal issues," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You tried to damage my career because I asked for space. What choice have you left me?" "This isn't about the job," Rachel said, her voice softening suddenly. "It's about us, about our marriage. Don't you remember how good things used to be?" For a moment, I hesitated. There had been good times, especially in the beginning. Trips to the coast, Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper, the way she used to look at me like I was her hero. "I remember," I said finally, "but I also remember how things changed. How you changed. How I let myself become someone I don't recognize anymore." "People change, Ethan. Marriages evolve. That doesn't mean you throw them away." "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm acknowledging what's already been lost." I opened my car door. "Please, go home. We're done here." Rachel's face hardened again. "Fine, but don't come crawling back when you realize what you've given up." She turned and stalked away, heels clicking sharply on the concrete. That evening, I checked into a different hotel, not wanting to risk another confrontation. I ordered room service, opened my laptop, and began the painful process of untangling my life from Rachel's. Joint accounts, shared subscriptions, the 1,000 tiny threads that bind two lives together. Around 9, my phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Neighborhood meeting tomorrow night. Rachel's been talking. Some people want to hear your side." I groaned. The last thing I wanted was to air my private business at a neighborhood meeting, but allowing Rachel's version to stand unopposed seemed worse. "I'll be there," I replied. The next evening, I arrived at the community center to find about 20 neighbors gathered. Rachel was notably absent. Grace met me at the door, her expression concerned. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "These people aren't owed your story." "Maybe not," I agreed, but I owe it to myself to set the record straight. Inside, the neighbors fell silent as I entered. Some looked embarrassed, others curious. Karen Miller, the one who'd spotted me with Grace, couldn't meet my eye. "Thank you for coming, Ethan," said Dave Johnson, our neighborhood association president. "There's been some concern about what's happening between you and Rachel." I nodded. "I appreciate the concern, but to be clear, what's happening between me and my wife is private." "Of course," Dave nodded, "but Rachel has made certain allegations that affect the community, specifically regarding your friendship with Grace." I felt Grace stiffen beside me. "What exactly has Rachel said?" Dave looked uncomfortable. "She suggested that you two were having an affair and that it started before your separation." A murmur ran through the room. I saw judgment in some faces, sympathy in others. "That's categorically false," I said, my voice firm. "My separation from Rachel has nothing to do with Grace or anyone else. It's about patterns in our marriage that became unsustainable." "Like what?" Karen Miller called out, finding her voice. "You seemed fine at the barbecue until Rachel made that joke." I took a deep breath. That joke was a symptom, not the cause. For years, Rachel has treated me with casual disrespect, small digs, public criticism, dismissing my thoughts and feelings. The joke was just the moment I finally decided to value myself enough to say no more. The room fell silent. I could see recognition dawning on some faces, particularly the other husbands. "That doesn't explain why you've been spending time with Grace," Karen pressed. Grace stepped forward. "I reached out to Ethan because I recognized what he was going through. My ex-husband treated me the same way Rachel treats him. There's nothing romantic between us, just the understanding of someone who's walked a similar path." Dave cleared his throat. "Well, I think that clarifies things. As I said before, this is a private matter between Ethan and Rachel." The meeting shifted to community business, but the atmosphere remained charged. As people filed out afterwards, several neighbors approached me privately. Mark Henderson gripped my shoulder and simply said, "Been there, man. Stay strong." Sarah Thompson, whose husband had left her last year, apologized for initially believing Rachel's version. Grace and I walked home together, the summer evening warm around us. "Thank you," I said as we reached her driveway, "for standing up for me in there. You didn't have to do that." She smiled, the porch light casting soft shadows across her face. "Actually, I did. Truth matters, Ethan. Even uncomfortable truth." I hesitated. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" "Just as friends," I added quickly. "I could use someone to talk to who understands." "I'd like that," she said. "But let's wait until the dust settles a bit. People love to confirm their suspicions." I nodded. "You're right. Rain check then." As I turned to go, Grace caught my arm. "Ethan, it gets better. I promise." The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings, property negotiations, and emotional processing. Rachel alternated between tearful pleas and cold fury, often in the same conversation. One moment she'd beg me to come home, the next she'd threaten to destroy me if I didn't change my mind. "You're nothing without me," she said during one particularly heated phone call. "Do you think you'll ever find someone who understands you like I do? Who puts up with your boring routines and your constant overthinking?" "That's exactly the problem," I replied calmly. "You put up with me. You don't value me." "Oh, grow up," she snapped. "This isn't some rom-com where you find the perfect woman who worships the ground you walk on. This is real life. In real life, marriages are about compromise and tolerance. And respect," I added, "which is the one thing I'm no longer willing to compromise on." The divorce proceedings dragged on longer than they should have. Rachel contested everything, demanded more than her fair share, and generally made the process as difficult and expensive as possible. My lawyer assured me this was common. "It's not about the money," Marianne explained during one of our meetings. "It's about control. When someone feels they're losing control of the narrative, they often try to regain it through the legal process." I moved into a small apartment downtown, close to my office. The space was half the size of our suburban home, but it was mine in a way no place had been for years. I arranged my books on shelves. Hung art I'd always liked, but Rachel had deemed too masculine. Bought a comfortable chair just for reading. Slowly, I reconnected with old friends Rachel had deemed boring or negative. I visited Michael in Portland for a weekend that reminded me how much I'd missed my brother. I started running again, something Rachel had subtly discouraged by scheduling social events on weekend mornings. And yes, I started spending more time with Grace. Coffee became dinner, dinner became hikes on weekends, hikes became movie nights and long conversations about life, love, and second chances. We were careful, moving slowly, aware of how it might look to others. But there was an ease between us that I'd never experienced before, a mutual respect that formed the foundation of everything else. "You're different with her," Michael observed during one of our phone calls. "More yourself." "What do you mean?" "With Rachel, you were always, I don't know, muted somehow. Like you were holding part of yourself back. With Grace, you sound whole." His words struck me as profoundly true. With Rachel, I'd spent years carefully editing myself. My thoughts, my feelings, my preferences, to avoid conflict or criticism. With Grace, I didn't need to filter. She didn't always agree with me, but she always respected my perspective. 5 months into our separation, Rachel reached out with an unexpected request. She wanted to meet in person to discuss the divorce. Wary but hopeful that she might finally be ready to proceed amicably, I agreed to coffee at a neutral location. When I arrived at the cafe, Rachel was already seated, looking polished and composed. Gone was the emotional wreck of our previous encounters. This Rachel was cool, collected, and unmistakably strategic. "You're looking well," she said as I sat down across from her. "Divorce agrees with you." "We're not divorced yet," I reminded her. "Thanks to your continuous delays." She waved a dismissive hand. "Details. Anyway, I wanted to meet because I've had time to think about things, and I'm ready to be reasonable." "I'm glad to hear that." I kept my voice neutral, though hope flickered inside me. "Maybe we could finally end this chapter cleanly. I'll sign the papers," she continued. "I'll stop contesting the asset division. I'll even take less than half of the retirement accounts." I raised an eyebrow. "In exchange for—" A small smile played at her lips. "Smart man, always looking for the catch. Experience is a good teacher." "Fair enough," she leaned forward. "In exchange, I want you to make a public statement. Nothing elaborate. Just a social media post acknowledging that our marriage ended because we grew apart, not because of anything I said or did." I frowned. "Why does that matter to you?" "Because despite what you might think, I have feelings," Rachel said, a hint of genuine emotion breaking through her composed facade. "And it hurts that everyone in our circle thinks I'm the villain in this story." I studied her face, searching for manipulation but finding only wounded pride. "Rachel, I haven't been telling people you're the villain. I've barely discussed our separation with anyone. You didn't have to. That little display at the neighborhood meeting did it for you." She sipped her coffee. "You and Grace, the wounded parties, standing up against the mean, disrespectful wife. That wasn't my intention. Intention or not, that's how it played out." She set her cup down carefully. "So, do we have a deal? You post a neutral statement, I stop fighting the divorce, and we both move on with our lives." I considered her offer. It would certainly simplify things. And was a social media post really such a high price for peace? But something about it felt wrong. Like I'd be whitewashing the truth to protect Rachel's reputation, just as I'd spent years smoothing over her behavior to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I can't do that." Her expression hardened. "Why not? It's a simple request." "Because it's not true," I replied. "We didn't just grow apart. You systematically undermined my confidence and self-worth through years of subtle and not so subtle disrespect. That's the reality I lived, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." Rachel's carefully constructed composure cracked. "So you'd rather drag this out? Make us both miserable for months longer? All because you won't write one little post? I'd rather be honest, with myself, with you, with everyone." I stood up. "If you want to end this amicably, then do it because it's the right thing to do, not as part of a transaction where I have to deny my experience." As I walked away, Rachel called after me. "You're going to regret this, Ethan. I promise you that." Her words followed me out of the cafe, a chill running down my spine. I believed her. Rachel had always been skilled at making people pay for crossing her. True to her word, Rachel escalated her tactics. She contacted my parents, spinning a tale of my supposed emotional instability. She reached out to mutual friends with concerns about my relationship with Grace. She even tried contacting my company's HR department again, suggesting I was using company resources to pursue personal vendettas. Most of her attempts failed. My parents, having witnessed her behavior firsthand over the years, weren't swayed. Most of our friends had seen enough to form their own judgments. And my company, thanks to Alan's support, stood firmly behind me. But the constant barrage was exhausting. Every day seemed to bring a new fire to extinguish, a new rumor to counter, a new emotional ambush to navigate. "She can't keep this up forever," Grace assured me one evening as we walked along the waterfront. "Eventually she'll run out of energy or realize it's not working." "I hope you're right," I sighed. "I'm just tired of living in a state of constant defense." Grace squeezed my hand. "You know what might help? Focusing on something positive, something future-oriented." "Like what?" "Well," she said thoughtfully, "you mentioned you've always wanted to volunteer with veterans. Why not start now? Channeling your energy into something meaningful might be the perfect antidote to Rachel's negativity." The suggestion resonated. During our marriage, Rachel had always discouraged my interest in volunteer work, arguing that we didn't have time or that there were more effective ways to make a difference than direct service. The next day, I reached out to a local veterans organization. They were planning a fundraising event and needed help with organization and outreach. Exactly the kind of project where my engineering mindset and planning skills could be useful. As I threw myself into the volunteer work, something unexpected happened. The constant stress of Rachel's harassment began to fade into the background. Not because it stopped, but because it mattered less. My days were filled with meaningful work, genuine connections, and a sense of purpose that had been missing for too long. Grace joined the effort too, leveraging her environmental consulting contacts to secure donations and sponsorships. Together, we developed the event from a simple dinner into a community-wide gathering with auctions, entertainment, and extensive media coverage. 3 weeks before the event, Alan called me into his office. I went with trepidation, wondering if Rachel had found some new angle of attack. "Close the door," Alan said when I entered. His expression gave nothing away. I sat across from him, bracing for bad news. "I've been watching your work these past few months," he began. "Despite the personal challenges you've been facing, your performance has remained exemplary. In fact, it's improved." "Thank you," I said, surprised by the direction of the conversation. "I've also noticed your volunteer work with the Veterans Group." He leaned forward. "It's impressive, Ethan. The way you've structured the event, the sponsors you've secured, the community engagement you've generated. It shows leadership potential I'm not sure you realize you have." I shifted in my seat, uncomfortable with the praise but undeniably pleased. "It's a team effort." "Most significant achievements are," Alan agreed, "but teams need leaders." He slid a folder across the desk. "Which brings me to the reason I called you in today. I'm offering you a promotion to senior project manager." I stared at the folder. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Alan smiled. "The position comes with a substantial salary increase, more autonomy, and the chance to build your own team. It also involves some travel. We're expanding our presence on the East Coast, and I'd want you to lead that initiative." The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Rachel had criticized my supposed lack of ambition, my contentment with my current position. Now, just months after leaving her, I was being offered exactly the kind of advancement she'd pushed for. "I'd be honored," I said, extending my hand. "Thank you for the opportunity." "You've earned it," Alan replied, shaking my hand firmly. "And if I may speak personally for a moment, it's good to see you coming into your own, Ethan. Sometimes we don't realize how much we're holding ourselves back until we stop." His words stayed with me as I left the office, the promotion folder tucked under my arm. How much had I been holding myself back? How many opportunities had I declined? Ideas had I suppressed? Dreams had I abandoned? Not because Rachel actively prevented me, but because I'd internalized her perspective of me as unambitious, uncreative, unexceptional. That evening, I shared the news with Grace over dinner at my apartment. Her reaction, unguarded joy, genuine pride, complete lack of surprise, brought tears to my eyes. "Of course they promoted you," she said, raising her glass in toast. "They'd be idiots not to recognize what you bring to the table." "It feels surreal," I admitted. "For so long I believed Rachel's assessment of me, that I was limited somehow, content with mediocrity." Grace shook her head. "That was never about you. That was about her need to feel superior." We stayed up late that night, talking about possibilities. The promotion, the veterans event, the future stretching before us, suddenly wider and more vibrant than it had seemed in years. The veterans fundraiser exceeded all expectations. Local media covered the event, featuring interviews with organizers and participants. The turnout was 3 times what we'd projected, and the donations far surpassed our goal. Standing on the stage with Grace beside me, addressing a room full of veterans, supporters, and community members, I felt a confidence I'd forgotten was possible. This wasn't the tentative, apologetic presence I'd cultivated during my years with Rachel. This was something stronger, more authentic, the person I was always meant to be. After the speeches, as guests mingled and bid on auction items, a local reporter approached us. "I'd love to get a few quotes for the evening edition," she said, notepad ready. "This event has really captured the community's attention." We answered her questions about the organization, the cause, and the overwhelming support we'd received. As she turned to leave, she asked one final question. "You two make quite a team. How long have you been working together?" Grace and I exchanged glances. "Just a few months," I replied, "but sometimes you meet people who bring out the best in you." The reporter smiled. "That's a lovely sentiment. Do I have permission to quote you on that?" "Absolutely," I nodded. Little did I know how those words would come back to haunt Rachel. The next morning, a small article about the fundraiser appeared in the local paper and its online edition. It wasn't front-page news, but it included a photograph of Grace and me on stage, along with my quote, "About people who bring out the best in you," a minor human interest story, quickly forgotten by most who saw it, but not by Rachel. 3 days after the event, the divorce was finalized. Rachel finally stopped contesting the proceedings, though she negotiated aggressively until the end. I gave her the house, taking only what was unquestionably mine, plus a fair financial settlement. It was worth it to finally be free. That evening, I invited Grace to dinner to celebrate the official end of my marriage and the beginning of whatever came next. We went to an upscale restaurant downtown, toasting to new beginnings with champagne. "To freedom," Grace said, raising her glass. "And to finding yourself again," I added. We lingered over dinner, talking about everything and nothing. About her work as an environmental consultant, about my upcoming trip to Boston for the company expansion, about books we'd read and places we'd traveled. For the first time in years, I felt truly engaged in a conversation, not performing or placating, but genuinely connecting. "Move in with me," I said suddenly, surprising myself with the words. "My lease is up next month, and I've been looking at houses. We could find one together." Grace's eyes widened. "Ethan, that's a big step." "I know," I acknowledged. "And if it's too soon, I understand. But when something feels right, why wait?" She reached across the table, taking my hand. "Are you sure you're ready? The divorce just became final today." "The marriage ended months ago," I said. "Everything since then has just been paperwork." Grace smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Then yes, let's find a place together." The next morning, I woke to a text from Michael. "Have you seen this? Call me." Attached was a screenshot of a social media post from Rachel. It was a photo of her sitting alone in our old living room, my former living room, watching the evening news on TV. The image was clearly staged for maximum emotional impact, complete with a crumpled tissue in her hand and a glass of wine on the table. The caption read, "Sitting alone tonight, watching my ex-husband on the news with his new girlfriend, organizing charity events while I'm still picking up the pieces of the life he shattered." Funny how quickly someone shows their true colors once they find someone who brings out the best in them. Heartbroken, shocked, or moving on. The post had hundreds of sympathetic comments and reactions. Rachel had always been skilled at crafting a compelling narrative, And this was masterful manipulation, positioning herself as the abandoned wife, still mourning while her husband publicly flaunted his new relationship. I called Michael immediately. "This is ridiculous," I said when he answered. "She's the one who dragged out the divorce. She's the one who tried to destroy my career." "I know," Michael replied calmly. "And everyone who actually knows you knows that too. But Ethan, she's hurting. This post isn't about facts. It's about pain." "Pain she brought on herself," I argued. "Maybe so, but pain nonetheless." Michael paused. "Look, you've moved on. You're happy with Grace. You got the promotion. You're doing meaningful work. Why let Rachel's social media theatrics pull you back into the drama?" He was right, of course. Engaging with Rachel's post would only feed the narrative she was creating. The best response was to continue living well, focusing on the future rather than getting dragged back into the past. But that night, as Grace and I looked at houses online, I couldn't shake a nagging discomfort. Not because I doubted my decisions, but because I hated the idea of Rachel rewriting our history, casting herself as the victim of my supposed callousness. "You're distracted," Grace observed, closing the laptop. "Is it the post?" I nodded. "I know I shouldn't let it bother me, but it feels so unjust." "Justice isn't always possible," she said gently. "Sometimes the best we can hope for is peace." "How did you handle it when your ex tried to control the narrative?" Grace considered the question. "At first I fought it, tried to correct every misconception, defend myself against every accusation. It was exhausting and ultimately pointless." She tucked her legs beneath her on the couch. "Then I realized something important. His story only had power if I gave it power." "What do you mean?" "I mean that by constantly responding, defending, engaging, I was validating his version of events as something worthy of my energy." She took my hand. "The day I stopped fighting his narrative and started living my own was the day I truly became free." Her words resonated deeply. All these months I'd been reacting to Rachel, her accusations, her manipulations, her attempts to control how others perceived me. Even in resistance, I'd allowed her to set the terms of engagement. "You're right," I said finally. "It's time to write our own story." In the weeks that followed, Rachel made several more attempts to draw me back into conflict. More pointed social media posts, a tearful call to my mother, even a letter sent to our old neighbors detailing her version of events. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, Grace and I focused on building our life together. We found a beautiful craftsman house halfway between both our workplaces. I traveled to Boston to launch the new office. We adopted a rescue dog named Cooper, who quickly became the center of our household. 6 months after the divorce, I received an unexpected email from Rachel. "Ethan, I saw the announcement about your promotion to regional director in the Business Journal. Congratulations. I always knew you had it in you, even if you didn't believe it yourself. I'm writing because I think it's time we made peace with the past. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it wasn't the one-sided disaster you've made it out to be either. We had good years together, and I hope someday you'll remember those too, not just the ending. I'm seeing someone new. He's kind and patient, and everything you thought I needed. Perhaps he is. Perhaps we're both exactly where we're meant to be. I don't expect a response. I just wanted you to know that I'm okay, and in my better moments, I hope you are too." Rachel. I stared at the screen for a long time after reading her words. There was a manipulative undertone to the message. The suggestion that I'd made up the problems in our marriage, the implication that she'd always believed in me more than I believed in myself. Classic Rachel, rewriting history to cast herself in the best possible light. But beneath that, I sensed something genuine. A recognition, however reluctant, that our paths had diverged for a reason, that perhaps the end of our marriage had freed us both to become more authentic versions of ourselves. I didn't reply to the email. Some doors are better left closed, even when the person on the other side extends what might be an olive branch. Instead, that evening, I sat on the porch of the home I shared with Grace, watching Cooper chase squirrels in our yard. Grace joined me, handing me a glass of wine. "Good day," she asked, settling into the chair beside mine. "Better than most," I replied, thinking about Rachel's email but choosing not to mention it. Some ghosts belong firmly in the past. "How was yours?" As Grace told me about her day, the challenges, the victories, the moments of connection. I felt a profound gratitude wash over me, not just for her presence in my life, but for the journey that had brought me here, for a thoughtless joke at a summer barbecue that had cracked the foundation of my old life, for the pain and growth that followed, for finding the courage to demand respect and the joy of finally receiving it. 1 year to the day after the barbecue that changed everything, Grace and I hosted our own summer gathering. Many of the same neighbors came, though the dynamic had shifted considerably. Rachel had finally sold the house to a young family from California. Her relationship with the kind and patient man she'd mentioned hadn't lasted. His kindness apparently wasn't compatible with her need for drama. As I stood at the grill, carefully turning steaks and chatting with neighbors, I caught sight of something that made me pause. On the television inside, visible through the open patio doors, a local news segment was playing. The ticker at the bottom announced, "Local engineer promoted to regional director." It was a small piece about the expansion of our company into new markets, featuring a brief interview I'd given earlier that week. Nothing extraordinary, just a standard business news item that would be forgotten as soon as the next story aired. But in that moment, watching my professional accomplishments broadcast publicly, I thought about Rachel, about where she might be right now, alone in her new apartment perhaps, watching this same news segment, seeing the man she'd dismissed as unambitious now, leading a regional expansion, witnessing the life I'd built without her. I hoped it hurt. Not because I wished her pain, but because sometimes pain is the only teacher that gets through to people like Rachel. Sometimes seeing the success of someone you've undervalued is the only way to recognize what you've lost. Grace appeared beside me, slipping an arm around my waist. "You're lost in thought. Everything okay?" I smiled down at her. "Never better. Just thinking about how much can change in a year." "For the better," she added, kissing my cheek. "For the better," I agreed, turning back to the grill. Across town, in a sleek but soulless apartment, Rachel Miller sat alone on her couch. The television played softly in the background, illuminating her tear-streaked face. On the screen, her ex-husband spoke confidently about market expansion and innovative approaches. She'd been drinking wine since noon, scrolling through social media posts of the neighborhood barbecue she hadn't been invited to. Pictures of Ethan and Grace, looking happy and relaxed in the home that should have been hers. Images of neighbors, her former friends, laughing and enjoying themselves without her. The news segment ended, but Rachel continued staring at the screen. On the coffee table, her phone buzzed with a text from her latest boyfriend, canceling their plans for the third time this week. "He was right," she whispered to the empty room. "You can't joke respect back into existence." She reached for the wine bottle, finding it empty. Like everything else in her life. In the dark apartment, the television flickered to the next story. Rachel didn't notice, lost in the ruins of the life she'd dismantled with a single, thoughtless joke.